this recording of a PowerPoint slideshow that will accompany your child development training for ECE TRIS credit. I'm just going to give you a moment if you would like to pause and get your training materials together. You should have a Word document that you've already completed part of, and now you're coming to the portion where you'll take some notes during this presentation. So Childhood's Pathways is the name of the training, just to make sure you're in the right one. I have a few notes here from my own incorporation of some things for the training, and I wanted to make sure those were clear to you before we officially got started. You'll notice there's a little icon right here that allows you to click on it when you're just viewing the PowerPoint, and when you see that, it means that I've read something that's quoted on the page, a poem or a quote that is very long and I won't take the time to read during this training. And also you'll see some video links in this training that you'll want to go back through probably and watch again. And I'm going to record this particular training in 3 separate sections. So this would be the first section of our training. So because this overview of development is being done with preschool child care settings where children come to us pretty much every day, I really like this poem, September, the First Day of School, and I think it sets the tone for what we're looking for in terms of our own objectives for how we meet children when they come to us in these school settings, whether they're part of a child care facility or just a preschool morning or afternoon offering. I think it's important to remember how parents send their children to us and how we receive them makes all the difference. So we're going to go to officially begin here. I wanted to give you a moment to make sure you've completed part 1, your pre-training notes, where I asked you to list what you pretty much already know. Most of you who are reviewing this overview probably have been working with children for a long time and you have accumulated a lot of knowledge, so I want to make sure I honor that. And then in this part 2, I'm going to let you just take notes in the pieces of the document I provided, but you will not submit those notes. So feel free to draw, doodle, use colored pencils, however you like to do your note taking in that section. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and make sure you've again got all those materials that you need. Okay, so also wanted to clarify, because this is a developmental overview training, I want to make sure it's really clear to you that there are some things we will not cover, again, because first of all, I really believe most of you that are taking this training probably have had some experience with young children in some capacity, and so you may know a lot about what they do at different ages and stages. But also, there's so many charts and illustrations out there about ages and stages that are really good, that I don't really feel the need to go into those in great depth here. I have attached the one that I like that gives ages and stages information. I think it's really important to know it. But I'm not going to spend time on those specific things about physical development when children first say their first word, or when we should expect them to walk, or any of those types of very specific skills. Usually, unfortunately, we focus a lot on those skill checklists, and lots of you may have to use those in parent conferences or other responsibilities you have as a child care or preschool teacher provider. So I'm not going to go into all of that in this training overview, but it's not because I don't think it's important. It's just that I feel like a review of those is probably plenty at this point in your work with young children. So what will we review? Well, we're definitely looking at ages birth to age 5. We'll stop at age 5, even though early childhood technically goes on to age 8. Unfortunately, most children go on to kindergarten and school at that point. And so that period of early childhood, though it continues, it really isn't part of most facilities that are doing developmental work with young children, whether it's child care or preschool or both. So if your center does do after-school care, there can be a separate piece on that developmental overview, but it will not be included here. The other thing this training will let us do is consider these foundational pieces and how we can match those with areas of content, such as literacy or math, science, art, whatever, music, all of that. How do we connect this developmental overlay to those content pieces? And those will be examined in future trainings. So for now, we're really just looking at development by itself. I've given you a list here of the primary sources that I've used in this particular presentation. Obviously, there are many more out there that are not mentioned here, but these are a list of the individuals whose work is definitely referenced here, not specifically in terms of needing citation or quotes, but more a general study and composite look at their work. If you want to learn more about any of the things in this presentation and you want to read any one of these particular individuals, would be a great place to start. I wanted to say it's noteworthy that some of these individuals have since passed on, but their work has outlived their lifetime. So really important to note that I am drawing on very old and time-tested resources. So often in early childhood, especially because there is so much new information all the time, we have a tendency to get in a rut of flavor of the month, a lot of people call it. I don't really like that term for these purposes, because I think that new information in terms of the scientific resources we have about early childhood are really important, and they're worth our attention, and they're also worth stopping and changing our practices based on those. So I'm not suggesting that new information and new practices being introduced in new trainings are not a good thing. I think they're a wonderful thing. However, I wanted you to know for this particular presentation, I've not only drawn on more recent research, which you'll see in the coming slides, but also individuals who've been doing this work for a very, very long time. Certainly in the case of Caroline Pratt and Jean Piaget, those are old resources, and many of you are probably familiar with names like Montessori. I did not include her ideas in this presentation specifically, but certainly she's another time-tested influence on the realm of early childhood, and should be. So both things are important. looking at new research, but also remembering the pieces that keep coming back in new ways. That's what I'll say. When you read Caroline Pratt in this particular presentation from 1948, for example, her book, I Learned from Children, which was republished recently. I didn't know that until the other day, but she's somebody in 1948 who was saying so much of the same things we're saying now that I can't resist sharing her work with you. So, how do we know these children who come to us? And once we look at that, how do we help them know themselves? So if we look at a desired outcome of this particular training, one of them is that I'm hoping you'll start to see that all of this really directs us about how to help children know themselves. So take a minute and first think about how you come to know and understand the children in your classroom. So if it's the beginning of the school year and you're just getting to know children, or maybe you taught their older siblings, but every child that comes to us is different, even if they come from the same family. I taught a family one time that had taught all 5 of their children, and they were all so different. So how do you, as a teacher, do that? What are your practices that help you reflect on the children in the classroom and who they are? And I just want to point out here our relationship to parents in that regard. It's kind of cliche to say parents are our partners, and some of us might even roll our eyes when we say that because we don't feel that oftentimes, and they might roll their eyes when we say that because they don't feel that. And it's really tricky because together we're raising this child. So as cliche as it is, it's still true. We really are partners. We may not be working as harmoniously as we could be sometimes. And other times when we are working together really well, everything flows and it really shows in the children. So the way I suggest we think about it in terms of development is that we think of parents as our partners in that they know their children in ways we don't, especially not yet if they're new to us. But even if we've known a child for 4 or 5 years in our center, our preschool, we really don't know them the way parents do. We may know different things about them than parents, but parents really are the experts on their own children. I think where we come in is that, as their partners, is that we know development. We know where children kind of start from and where they go, and we know things about their children they don't know, of course, because we see them in a very different circumstance and we have a different relationship to them. But if we can stop and think of ourselves as knowing some things parents don't know about their own children, but more important, that if we think of ourselves as knowing development. And most parents really don't know development. They may have read every book under the sun, but they're really zeroed in on their own child's development. And it's very hard for them sometimes to have the big picture. And that's where we come in. And so when we work together in that way, and we listen to them and they listen to us, because we're not trying to tell them who their child is. We're respecting the fact that they really do know their children. There can be a much more harmonious relationship, of course, but also it helps children come to know themselves, because both adult groups involved, whether it's parents, by the way, or guardians, whoever has care of the child that you're in relationship to, I should qualify that. the aim is that we work together so the child can know themselves, so they can become familiar with their own processes and their own preferences. And that takes time and cooperation among all the adults that are working with that child. So the overlays of development that we're going to look at here, they're not really guides in the sense that we're going to check off milestones or skills as children demonstrate them, so to speak. We're really going to look at kind of what's going on in a couple specific areas and start thinking about what experiences kids need and what obstacles are in the way in terms of their knowing themselves. So here we go. Again, we're going to do birth to age 5 in this particular study. So as we go through, we're going to look at 3 areas of focus that are maybe a little different than some developmental overviews. You're not going to, again, see me say, well, at age 3, they should be able to say, sentences comprised of 5 words, things like that. We're not going to do that. We may look at literacy skills later on in other trainings, but we're never going to really look at things that specifically. Like I say, there are plenty of resources about that if you're interested in very specific pieces of development. We're going to look at these 3. The matrix, which is basically, by definition, a source for information. So at different times in a child's life, different people or experiences become the way they learn about their world. So if you fast forward that into adolescence, which most of us can remember, by that time your matrix or your peer group, unfortunately, depending on your high school experience, but you're learning about the world through your peer group usually. So the matrix is this primary connection at a particular time in your life that really informs everything so to speak, about the world. So certainly if you're in the womb, if you're not born yet, your matrix is your mother. Whether your mother keeps you and raises you, doesn't matter. When you are in her womb, she is your matrix. She's the source for all your information. Her heartbeat, her words, her actions, the food she eats, everything. The other thing we're going to look at is thinking capacities. So different ways of looking at how cognition, which is the way it's often referred to in development, occurs and what we can be doing about that. And something that is really important to consider in terms of thinking capacity is that we do know now that those thinking capacities that are, quote, born in early childhood really are not fully developed until adulthood in many cases, and they change over time. So it's really good to have this brain science, and what's informed that as a science was the development of the MRI, because the MRI allowed us to actually see the brain and know what parts of the brain were functioning at what times and how neural pathways connected or did not connect. So that was a huge advance scientifically that has really changed the way we approach early childhood in many ways, and in other ways it's left it exactly the same. So I think you'll see that as we go through. As I mentioned with the resources, there's new information, and then from my point of view, which I'll insert here as my opinion, not fact, but I think that what we can be excited about is that there's a new science basically confirms what we kind of intuited about what children need. So I like that, to think of it that way. And then the last thing we'll look at are the feeling capacities children have at different ages and stages, how they develop socially and emotionally. And again, the science that's new has borne out what we, in many ways, understood, but in some really important ways, the science has eliminated what we once believed about children and their feelings. And that's really important too. It has especially completely changed how we think of children in terms of what we used to call discipline or managing behavior, those kinds of things. So those processes have really been completely turned upside down by the science of emotional and feeling capacity in early childhood. And I think you'll see that as we go through this training. So again, the matrix is the source of information. And you can see I have a sound piece here that you could go back and read, but this is from Caroline Pratt from 1948. And I love reading it. I especially love the part about the milkman and the grocer boy who delivers the food. Of course, those things are, well, maybe some people still use those, I don't know, but it's kind of charming to see. But the most important point is that, you know, really, if you read this, nothing's changed. We still see this ever widening source of information that children have as they go through the process of growing up and developing. And again, there's brain and cognitive development. The science that's very recent on this really comes out of Harvard Center for the Developing Child and some other places too, but I really like this particular spot because they do a lot of scientific research and they post regularly all the time. Right now they have a huge part about COVID that's incredible. So if you haven't ever visited that resource, please do. But the other thing about it is that it's very reliable and time tested, but also progressive, pushing things forward and helping us understand more and more about this particular part of development especially. But they connect this part of development to every aspect of the child's life, not just how do you learn the alphabet or how do you learn to read or how do you learn math or science. They connect this brain and cognitive development to every aspect of living. So if you have a child in your class, for example, that doesn't seem to be able to be resilient, they have a whole section about the science of the brain and resilience. So I really love the way they've used their science about the brain and thinking to help us understand every aspect of a child's development. And we'll also be looking at Piaget's stages very closely because they connect, again, with these also. There is a short video here that I will let you watch on your own time. You can just go through the PowerPoint on your own and click through, and I'm going to let you watch that on your own. And then, of course, we've talked about emotional and social development a little bit. And again, you know, the new science on this is that, well, relatively speaking new, it's probably 20, 30 years old now, but we're understanding more and more all the time about how the heart has a language and an intelligence connected to the brain all of its own. So this is a really exciting area of research and well worth our attention because emotionally and socially, if you're not healthy, it really doesn't matter what else you can do, because you will not be able to function in your life if you can't connect emotionally and socially with other human beings. So for me, I keep this part to last because I think that it's not well enough understood that this is actually an intelligence of its own. And if you're interested in more about that, there's lots of great reading and research. Joseph Chilton Pearce did a lot of work in this area, as well as many other people. There's lots of research about it, so I would encourage you to look at it. But the main thing I want you to get from this part is that we're not just talking about teaching kids how to use their words or how to talk to their friends. The kinds of things we say a lot in early childhood that really don't quite capture the gravity or the comprehensive nature of how intelligent this part of our world really needs to be and deserves to be. And that it should be grown just as carefully as all the other intelligences, so to speak, that we focus on, oftentimes connected to academic learning, but not really to everyday life or satisfaction with life or knowledge about yourself. So I just wanted to make sure that it was really clear how different maybe this focus is than you may have understood it in the past. So we are going to consider a few things in this particular overview. Why do human beings depend so long on primary caregivers for survival? And why is our mobility toward walking or standing up, why is that such a long process? I mean, you see a baby horse being born, and it doesn't take very long for it to be standing up and walking. It might be shaky, but it's not a long 9-10 month process. Why is that? So one of the answers that comes from science, especially, as I mentioned, the Harvard Center, they have coined this phrase, which I really like, called serve and return. And this begins really early and continues really through your whole life. But the process of serve and return it takes so long and involves so much that it could be an answer to why human beings do stay in that sort of helpless phase for much longer than other newborns in other species. And so I'm going to have you watch a series of videos in these coming slides, and then we'll come back to the next section of the training. So the first video would be this one about the science of early childhood. Again, why are we in this helpless stage for so long? The second video you'll watch is a big picture video about how this serve and return interaction shapes your brain for life. And it really, boy, if you ever need to show parents why early childhood matters so much, or a new teacher, this is your 2-minute answer right here. And the last one I want you to watch is just a series of 5 things that you can do to build up this capacity for serve and return. And when you watch it, I hope what you'll say is, wow, I do that all day, every day. I must be doing a great job. So yeah, you are. You've got this. And I certainly know that early childhood providers and teachers are doing these things. But I think it's great to look at these 5 steps and be able to talk about these with parents and new teachers, especially. But also to give language to what you know. So many times in early childhood, we know why we're doing what we're doing, and we know it's good. And it's so hard sometimes to talk about it in terms of the science of it. So I hope this really simple little video will give you some steps to look at and give you some language to use for your parent conferences, or if you're training a new teacher, or if you're trying to explain what you do to your neighbors and friends, or any of those things. I'm hoping that these 3 videos will do that, but especially this one. And so I'm going to stop. This is part 1 of your training in the developmental overview. And I'm going to let you watch those videos and take some notes while you're doing that. and we'll come back to part 2.